So we're going to get started here. Of course, we're recording. So for those of you who are watching this later, thank you for taking the time. For those of you who are here right now, we appreciate your time coming in here this morning on a Friday morning. It's not quite rainy, but we will be talking about things including climate and those things. So hopefully, I don't know, I'm probably not doing a good thing for the environment right now with the air conditioning on, but you know, it's I guess better being inside than in the 100-degree heat waves that we have every other week now, because we are not doing a good job being stewards of our environment. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how we can be better stewards of our environment and how we can start to do some really important work undoing some of the damage that we've done as a society to our environment around. And so I'm really excited about today's conversation. And I, again, appreciate you setting aside time to listen, to learn, and to participate. So we're going to do, as we often do, we'll have a presentation, and Fritz Schroeder here is going to lead that for us. But before we get to that, we're going to do a couple introductions. Again, I am Kevin Ressler, President and CEO of United Way. Always, rocking the branding everywhere I can, so you can tell where I come from. Some of our friends here, you'll find out where they come from, but we appreciate the time that you all are giving us here. Oh, who is our second Allison Gibson? Your link, Allison, you have given the wrong link to your friend. Can you change name there? And then, there we go, Jenna, thank you. I couldn't remember what your name was, I apologize. So Jenna has now joined us as well. We do not have two Allison Gibsons. But so we're gonna get started here. So grateful for everyone's participation. Allison Gibson, the real Allison Gibson, I will invite you to introduce yourself first.
Good morning. Thank you, Kevin. Good morning, all. My name is Allison Gibson. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Programs with the Lancaster Clean Water Partners. I am a Lancaster native and played in the streams as a kid, played in the farm fields, and am grateful for the chance to now be doing that as part of my job and bringing together all of the groups around Lancaster County that are doing that kind of clean water work, really pulling them tighter with one common goal in mind of clean and clear by 2040. So many of the panelists today are the leaders in that work, and I am so grateful for the chance to work with them on this kind of collaborative approach as we are working toward that one goal.
Thank you. And will the not real Allison Gibson please stand up? Jenna Mitchell-Beckett.
Thank you so much. Allison was helping me out, making sure that the link worked, and somehow our Zooms got combined, which is a fun Zoom experience. Yeah, Jenna Mitchell-Beckett. I'm the Pennsylvania State Director and Ag Program Director at the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. Our mission is to work with communities, companies, and conservationists to improve the lands and waters that flow into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And I work out of our Lancaster office, which, fun fact, used to be located in Harrisburg, but we moved it to Lancaster because we wanted to help this community, and we've got so much work to do here. Grateful to be joining you all.
Got to be where the action is. Kate Austin, please.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Austin. I'm the Green Infrastructure Asset Coordinator with the City of Lancaster. I work on all things stormwater, but especially focus on the operations and maintenance of our green infrastructure installations throughout the city. So our rain gardens and forest pavements and green roofs. I also serve as the board president for the Little Conestoga Watershed Alliance, one of our local watershed groups, and sit on the board of the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council. So as you might guess, I'm into all things sustainable landscaping, native plants, and water quality. So yeah, excited to talk with us today.
Thank you. We'll be talking later about the native plants I need to plant in my backyard to get rid of the mosquitoes. I need help.
Sounds good.
Samantha, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Vade. I work for an organization called Form for the Future. I'll just say a little bit about that organization because it might be new to many of you. We're an international nonprofit. We're actually headquartered out of London, but then have 4 regional offices across the globe in India, Singapore, New York. I actually work out of the New York office, but call Lancaster home. So I go back to New York fairly frequently. As a sustainability nonprofit, we focus on bringing systems change and applied future lenses to tackle some of the world's greatest environmental and social justice challenges. We work on climate change, sustainable food systems, and on sustainable livelihoods and value chains. And the work that I do at Forum is we just set our mission a couple years ago from being sustainable to being just and regenerative, and have been on an 18-month inquiry to kind of figure out what does that mean. And I do work at Forum bringing that wisdom from those 18 months to other businesses to help set their sustainability strategies, and have just taken on a role to help us figure out how do we align our own organization to be just and regenerative. So looking at not just at our environmental work, but things like decision-making and sharing power and things like that. So I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, so the rest of us will now drop off camera. We, are not disconnected. We'll be back at the end of Fritz's presentation. But Fritz, if you want to introduce yourself, and then feel free to go right into your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fritz Schroeder. I am the Senior Vice President with the Lancaster County Conservancy. I have been working with the Conservancy for 10 plus years, and I'm a resident and multi-generational family here from Lancaster County, born and raised, graduate of McCaskey High School in 1991, and proud to continue to work in conservation alongside some incredible professionals, including Jenna, Allison, and Kate. And I just appreciate United Way giving us this opportunity to talk about conservation. And I'm going to just start with a little overview of the Conservancy's work to help frame the conversation. We are a 69-year-old, we're a 53-year-old land trust that was founded in 1969. Our mission is providing wild and forested lands and clean waterways for our community forever. We were founded by a small group of hunters, anglers, and naturalists that realized that we were losing our forested lands here in Lancaster County at an alarming rate back in 1969. And so they set out on a course to protect those natural lands. Some were donated to them, and in many instances, they went out and started purchasing those lands. And to date, we have over 8,000 acres protected. That's on 48 unique nature preserves with 45 miles of trails and 34 miles of streams, 166 acres of wetlands. These preserves are open to you and I to use 365 days per year. About 5,500 of those acres are located in Lancaster County, with a majority of the remainder in York County, with a focus along the Susquehanna River, which is a major part of our strategy in Lancaster and York counties, are the municipalities and the forested lands along that incredible natural resource. One of the unique things about us as a land trust is that fact that we do go out and protect those lands, a majority of them by purchasing them outright, which is really expensive, and then taking on the long-term responsibility of maintaining them, of stewarding them and restoring them. And so I'm going to really highlight three things that we really focus on. It's the protection component. That is our number one goal, is protecting the remaining natural lands, the remaining forested lands in our community forever. Then there's the burden or the challenge that comes with that, which is the long-term maintenance of those properties, making sure they're safe and accessible for you and I, with parking lots, with sustainable trails, and with good signage, and then maintaining the invasive components and replenishing the native components that make those healthy forest systems. And then finally, the education and engagement component, how we engage with the community, with all of you, and what sort of programming we offer to the next generation of conservationists. But first, the why. Why do we do this? And I think that's pretty obvious to most of us, but especially during this time of a global pandemic, where we were overwhelmed in our parking lots and trails with the Lancaster Conservancy, but with all the park systems here in Lancaster County, with people getting out into nature, seeking it out for physical and mental well-being. We need these places to get to. They're restorative. There's plenty of qualitative and quantitative evidence out there now of the benefits of immersing ourselves in nature. And it's really important that we have access, that everyone has access to these nature preserves. We're also extremely concerned with the loss of habitat. the loss of insects, which is also impacting the loss of birds. And of course, if you saw the headlines this week, the monarch butterfly, the beloved monarch, is now on the endangered species list. And so we're really restoring these forests and protecting them for the ecosystems, the habitats that support our pollinators and support our entire ecological system, including our food systems. Of course, today you're going to hear a lot about clean water. It's a major priority for Lancaster County, and we're proud to play a role in that with the protection of our nature preserves, with the many miles that run through our nature preserves. The forested lands clean the water as the water rolls through, and there's a lot of great research that's being done and study that's being done on these streams and rivers. Of course, also our preserves, our forested lands are the lungs of our community. They help clean the air, and we're very concerned about climate change, and they do serve as carbon sinks. And we're doing a lot of restoration with carbon sequestration in mind, with healthy soil composition in mind, and looking toward long-term resilience around these incredible storms that we're experiencing and the impact that they have on our nature preserves and how we manage that storm water. And finally, of course, it's the engagement of the next generation of learners. That's really all generations of learners. There is more desire and need for people to immerse themselves in conservation education than ever before. And so with the advent and long-term development of Climbers Run Nature Center, we really want to get multiple groups, multiple generations out on our nature preserves to continue that learning process. I'm going to highlight some of the properties we protected recently and just talk a little bit about how that process works. So what I've highlighted here is Speedwell property. It's outlined in orange. It's near the Speedwell Forge Lake, which is an incredible resource for our community. This is north of Lidditz, south of Brickerville in Elizabeth Township. And that 99 acres or 90 acres borders the Speedwell Forge County Park. And we acquired this property last fall at auction. We went and competed for this 90 acres against developers and others who probably would have cleared the forest land and logged it. And we did that because for multiple reasons. First of all, it's really what we want to do. We want to protect all remaining forested lands, but we do have a scale that we use, a Linus scale, and this measured 90 out of 100 based on the resources that it protects. Not only the stream that runs through it directly into the Speedwell Forge Lake, its proximity to the lake, but also its proximity to already protected land with the Speedwell Forge County Park, which is 400 acres that we have an easement on. So we're just enhancing and expanding that opportunity of people to explore forested land. And we hope to open the trails on this preserve to connect them to the county park trails. So there won't be parking on this preserve, but it'll be connected to the county park trails in the coming years. As I already mentioned, we do a lot of work along the Susquehanna River. And what you see here on the right are some of our most popular nature preserves. This is a stretch of the river called Lake Aldred, south of Safe Harbor Dam and north of Holtwood Dam. This is the home of Kelly's Run, Tuck One Glen, Clark Nature Preserve. What isn't pictured there to the north is Shanks Ferry, all along this beautiful stretch of river. And so we work diligently through land protection, our incredible land protection team, to connect these parcels, and we continue to acquire small parcels around these to connect and infill with more forested land. If we have to acquire fringe lands, we restore them over time. But we're doing the same thing in York County on the other side of the river, which you can see there highlighted in yellow. And those are all plateaued lands that, could be developed over time. And we take the idea of protecting those for our viewshed here in Lancaster very seriously, but also those are beautiful glens and streams that flow right into the Susquehanna River, not unlike Kelly's Run and Tuck One Glen. Amazing places to explore, and we want them available for you and I to enjoy, our children, our grandchildren to enjoy for generations to come. And finally, our single largest acquisition, this was just announced in March. This is over 1,000 acres, again in York County in the Hellam Hills. And what you see here are two nature preserves that we have acquired over the last 5 years in Hellam Hills and Wizard Ranch, which equal almost 1,000 acres. And then you have a new acquisition at over 1,000 acres. And that combined, of course, is thousands of acres that we want to open to the public. We want to continue to connect those lands. We've done master planning for the two sites that we own. We have a new acquisition here, nearly $11 million to acquire it. It's under agreement. And now we go out and we raise the money. And about half of that money comes from public funds, often, fingers crossed, and then the other half comes from private donors, people like you and I that contribute to our organization over time to ensure that we can continue to go and protect these natural lands. The Hellam Hills and Wizard Ranch, with their master plans complete, should be open to the public in 2023 in some way, shape, or form, with parking and preliminary trails, but there's a lot of restoration work that's taking place on those nature preserves. Here is a view up and down the Susquehanna River, and the bridge you see upriver there is the Shocks Mill Bridge. So if you've ever ridden the Northwest River Trail, you've gone under the Shocks Mill Bridge. That is the view from this new acquisition, from this beautiful rock outcropping. And there are views all along these nature preserves that are similar in scope to that one. This is the Cadorus Creek, which runs out of York, that is very similar to our Conestoga River. That new acquisition borders this Cadorus Creek, and protecting that in perpetuity, this property that could have been turned into a huge housing development, was strategically important to our organization. It doesn't come without a lot of restoration work. We're working diligently at the Wizard Ranch location with the master planning that was done. We're already restoring nearly 70 acres of floodplain. This is an example of erosion that we often find on a property, like in the Hellam Hills, of some agricultural lands that will be restored over time. But here's an example from Wizard Ranch. There in the lower left-hand corner is actually a wetland that is fully overgrown with invasive plants that is currently being planned for a full restoration, and that feeds into a stream that is also being restored. It's nearly 70 acres of that 400 acres. The image you see there in the middle is the stream that flows out of Wizard Ranch after an incredible 4-inch storm about 4 years ago, completely, as 4 inches in about 90 minutes, completely destroyed the watershed, the road, and prohibited access for people that lived in that region. And so whenever we can go in and do restoration on our nature preserves to help manage that stormwater, we will. And that's what we're planning with this wetland and floodplain restoration. Here's what the master plan looks like. This is also a site in York County that we envision for engagement, the Wizard Ranch location. So not only is it getting a floodplain and floodplain and stream restoration, but we're also looking at more interpretive gardens, agroforestry, and lots of fringe ag lands that can be restored over time. And when I say over time, I'm talking about master plans that turn into on-site plans that turn into grant funding that are then implemented over time by either our team or local and regional professionals. Our stewardship team are very professional and like to do a lot of this work themselves, but then implemented over 5 to 10 years. But again, we hope that this Wizard Ranch property will be open to the public in 2023. Which brings me to outreach, both adult and youth education. Our adult education really focuses on volunteers and how we get people to participate in our stewardship process, to manage 8,000 acres with a goal of exceeding 10,000 acres in the next 5 years. We need the support of the community. So we now have a basic training program to bring stewards into the fold. It's an online Google Classroom that anyone can complete. And then it's up to you how long you want to, or how much work you want to put into to volunteering with our organization. Some people just like to adopt their favorite nature preserve, like a Kelly's Run, and go out for 2 or 3 hours every month and walk the trails and maybe pick up litter or remove invasives, do some trail brushing. They just fill out their hours on the app. And this all takes place after they complete the course and do an orientation. We also have folks who are getting way more engaged, who are coming out and participating actively in removing invasives. This is an image from Shanks Ferry Wildflower Preserve, where they're removing the invasive garlic mustard this spring. So it can really run the gamut of how people are getting involved in removing and participating in helping us restore these forested lands, removing invasives and helping replant them over time. Of course, engagement is really important to us. We get a lot of calls to participate in community outreach activities similar to this, but then also tabling and being present at different community functions where we promote our nature preserves with preserve guides and talk about native plantings and try to promote all the different things that we're doing as an organization that are happening in our community. We have a Water Quality Volunteer Coalition that we proudly partner with the Conservation District on, housed out of our Climbers Run Nature Center, where trained volunteers go out and monitor streams on a monthly basis. Perhaps that's something that you find yourself interested in doing from a science aspect, and collecting water samples and bringing them back to the center and making sure that they're documented over a period of time. Perhaps one of our most successful programs is Community Wildlife Habitat. This again is volunteer-led. This is really an effort to take the restoration work that we're doing on our nature preserves and bring it to the entire community, really targeting homeowners or property owners or communities of people that want to restore their properties. So there's a trained volunteer who will come out and spend 2 to 3 hours with you assessing your property for free. This is a free service that our volunteers offer to come out and assist you in identifying invasive plants, non-native plants on your property, and then help you kind of identify what sort of native plants should you fill in based on your soil types, the amount of sun and shade on your property, and looking at stormwater runoff, because that of course is a huge issue for us, is how do we help retain stormwater, and oftentimes native plants. Reducing your lawn size are really the first step to doing so. And that's a great service that we're excited to offer, which feeds into advanced volunteer training. We're expanding this dramatically in the coming years. This was a wilderness first aid training with lots of partner organizations participating that we offered this past winter, but we're also going to be doing a lot of advanced trainings in the future, stuff like chainsaw training, but also site identification, how to site plants and trees, and better identify invasive plants and native plants. Some of the things that are associated with community wildlife habitat are advanced trainings that we're going to be offering the community, because we're just seeing that there's a thirst and knowledge for adult learning that of course will benefit our entire community ecologically long term. Which segues into youth education and the next generation, and how important it is that we're educating youth. And we really pride ourselves on offering locations where anybody can come and experience nature, where we work with our partner organizations. Lancaster Rec just finished up a summer program with us. We partner with Chesapeake Bay Foundation, with the School District of Lancaster, with the YMCA, the YWCA, and a number of other organizations, in bringing youth to our nature preserves, where they can interact with our environmental educators and literally get in the streams and turn over rocks and capture bugs and learn to identify them, and start to talk about the comprehensive ecological systems that actually make up our environment, that of course are the reason that we're all here, right? Kind of connecting it back to life itself. Which brings me to Climbers Run Nature Center. This is the hub of learning for our organization. It's the base for all of our conservation education, and we have a vision. This has been functional for the last 10 years. It was originally acquired by the Boys and Girls Club, fully conditioned barn there with indoor classrooms. But we have a vision for expanding the nature preserve, the nature center, and making it more accessible with outdoor classrooms and viewing platform that is right next to Climbers Run Stream, which is right next to a wetland and a pond, so it's just a perfect learning location. We envision an ADA trail to provide access to the nature preserve. This is 113 acres, but a highly programmed 3 to 4 acres with interpretive gardens right around the barn with that ADA trail, expanded parking, widened driveway for bus access, so we can bring more school groups in. So we're currently doing the planning phase of this with the civil engineers and the landscape architects, and going out and raising money. And this is really a site where, like all of our sites, but this slightly more so with programming, is where all the community is welcome, and where we really want to facilitate programs for everyone to come and enjoy. Which brings me to our largest single community engagement. This is really driven by great partners like folks who are on this call today, which is Lancaster Water Week. We just completed our 6th year. Next year, first week of June, will be our 7th Lancaster Water Week. And this is really a community awareness campaign about our 1,400 miles of streams and rivers, and how we raise awareness about the importance of clean water to our community, not only as an economic driver, but as this beautiful natural resource that we all get to enjoy. And by the way, it's the source of our drinking water. We offer over 20 events that are meant to celebrate these incredible water resources, to really celebrate them as these special places to go and visit and learn about. We educate, so offering 101 and 201 kind of lecture series on how you can have a positive impact in your community on cleaning up these streams and rivers, identifying what watershed you live in, identifying what stream you live closest to, and getting you out on the water, which the final kind of purpose is really creating action, is getting people to take action. We did a large installation this year in Penn Square in front of the Fulton Bank with this beautiful pollinator wall with the Susquehanna River running through it. It was a free tree and plant wall where we distributed nearly 400 trees, completely democratizing tree distribution, and that anyone could come anytime for 10 days at any point in time during day or night and take a tree or plant from the wall. And this was all about educating the community again about the importance of our streams and rivers and how we can all take action to improve our ecological systems. We're great partners with Longs Park Music Series, their kickoff event, where we distributed hundreds of trees and got to interact with the 3,000 attendees to spread the word. 1,300 native plants and trees were distributed in total during the week. We've been doing that for 7 years. So thousands of trees have been out and gone to homes and been planted in communities, which we take great pride in, and continue to want to engage people of all ages. And this is the engagement that took place from all of our in-person events, which could have been 20 people attending a small lecture to thousands of people attending a really large public event, and everything in between as far as engaging folks. And then some cool, fun new partnerships this year with the Conestoga River Club, where they did multiple paddles along the Conestoga. Nearly 100 people participated. 80% of those people had never been on the Conestoga River paddling before. So introducing them to the Conestoga River for the first time from the river, developing that love of nature and the love of our beautiful Conestoga and the streams and rivers that make our community whole. I just have to shout out here at the end the incredible work of Jenna and Kate, who have been part of our founding committee and really helped drive Water Week from its very inception. And then, of course, Clean Water Partners and Allison, since their inception, have been tremendous partners in helping build the success of Lancaster Water Week. And with that, I just want to thank everyone who's in attendance. If you have any questions for me about the Conservancy, always feel free to go to our website where you can find all our nature preserves. Please feel free to email me and just appreciate your concern around conservation. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Kevin, to take it away.
Thank you so much, Fritz. As you were going through that and talking about little streams and rivers and creeks, and I'll invite the rest of our panelists to come back on. It reminds me when I was a kid, and Allison talked about growing up here and playing in the creeks and the streams and the dirt and all that type of stuff, right? So I lived in Eden Manor, which is a city annex over near Costco, and my backyard connected directly to Conestoga Pines Park, which is like an 8-acre park. It's a sizable portion of land, and there's this little stream that runs along Arthur E. Morris Parkway, which takes you down to the pool and down to the Conestoga River, the mighty, mighty Conestoga River. And I grew up playing in them, setting dams and all these things. And it was great. And, you know, we moved there when I was like 6, moved out of downtown and when I was like 6. And maybe when I was, I'm going to guess probably like 12, all of a sudden, no one had told any of the neighbors or anything. All of a sudden there's these signs go up. And it says basically like not habitable for human or animal wading, because upstream there had been like a battery factory for decades that just like was dumping battery acid right. Now, 2 things about that. One, I mean, just the lack of accountability, right? Like, now that company had gone bankrupt, so there was no one to sue X, Y, or Z. But like, I don't know, all of a sudden I'm told that the stream I've been playing in daily for years may cause cancer and there's no recourse. Like, so one is how we think about accountability, but the other was how we think about what this actually means, because that little creek feeds right into the Conestoga River 200 yards upstream from the water treatment plant for all of our drinking water. So it wasn't just me or my neighborhood playing in that stream. That was going into all of the drinking water, hopefully treated sufficiently or X, Y, or Z. And hopefully it's a bit of sort of bureaucratic overkill and there's actually no increased risk of cancer for me anyway, right? But I remember that then took me from a kid who loved playing in streams to being hesitant about my engagement with nature, right? And so hearing you talking about sort of engaging at love, and we know for many Black and brown individuals, sort of engagement with nature is often not as high on their experiential list because they just don't tend to be living in locations where that is their backyard, right? And so just wanted to sort of bring that in and think about how that, just even for me anecdotally, has made a significant shift in those things. And now we take our kids to Tuckahoe Glen, we take our kids to the county park and all those things and try to engage them because we do live downtown, but we have that access and that ability. So I want to actually start with you, Kate, because that property was, that's a city park. I mean, most people don't know about it. And I think it's one of the gems of the city that is there. But, can you just talk a little bit about sort of the city's green infrastructure? And so that was, to be clear, right? Like I'm 38 years old. So we're talking that was like 2 decades ago. So obviously it's not anything reflective on this administration or even the last 2 almost. But so help us think, what is the city sort of engagement with thinking about green infrastructure, about its parks, pathways, and opportunities for these various individuals to engage?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And yeah, I really appreciate your childhood story on that. And I think that it reminds me of other stories I've heard from people that it was a turning point for them in thinking about how to protect our waterways and the importance of it. And just so those signs are still in Conestoga Pines Park because it is still a contaminated waterway. And so it really, there's real long-term damage there. And so certainly, the city now has a real focus on trying to address water quality, both as we are impacting it within the city, and of course we need to be thinking about our upstream neighbors that might be impacting our waterways as well. And so the more the more polluted our waterways are, the harder our water treatment plant has to work to provide us clean water. We are accessing our drinking water from the Conestoga River and the Susquehanna River. And so it is really important we keep them as clean as we can, for ourselves personally. But so the city also faces a real challenge of, we have what's called a combined sewer system in most of the city, kind of the 4 square miles of the downtown of the city. And what that means is that when we have a rain event and the water goes into the storm drains in the street, they go into the same pipe that our sewage from our homes and our businesses go into as well. And in regular rain events, it's no problem at all. In fact, it's kind of great because all of our water ends up getting treated at the wastewater treatment plant before it discharges back out into the Conestoga River. The problem is when we have heavy rain events, like we're having more and more frequently these days, we have what are called combined sewer overflows. And so there are pipes that when there's too much water in the system, they will discharge the untreated water directly into the Conestoga River. So that means untreated sewage, untreated stormwater going into our waterway. And that is something that we are very concerned about reducing, 1, because we live right next to it, but 2, because the EPA is also very concerned about it. And so the city is under what's called a consent decree. So we're basically under a legal agreement that we're required to reduce those overflows. So a big part of our approach to addressing the problem, and it takes a lot of different tools, but one of the tools in the toolbox is green infrastructure. So you'll see all throughout the city. These are our rain gardens that you might see along streets, these little vegetated areas that are bumped out, maybe near a stop sign. We also have porous pavers and a large number of green roofs. I don't know if this number still holds, but I'm going to stick with it because I haven't been told it's not true anymore. But it was my understanding is that the city of Lancaster has the highest percentage of green roofs per capita in the country. So pays to be a small city, but So we have really been investing in the last 10 years in a lot of green infrastructure. And what it does is it essentially serves as sponges all over the city to absorb that stormwater when it falls. The city is about 50% impervious. So we're talking about surfaces that can't absorb water. So our roadways, our buildings, our sidewalks. And so we really need to create these pervious spaces where the water can enter the ground and slowly infiltrate into the soils and eventually replenish our groundwater. And so we are installing these practices all over in all neighborhoods in the city. And essentially we're trying to replicate what happens in nature. You know, what is happening in the beautiful forested areas that, that Fritz was showing us that the Conservancy is protecting. We want to try to replicate that in a little bit of an engineered way in the city, but all over so that we can be absorbing that rainwater when it falls. And by doing that, we're keeping it out of that combined sewer system. So we're taking the pressure off of our aging infrastructure to keep it going longer and reducing those sewer overflows.
Thanks. So it makes a lot of sense probably to jump to Allison, right? So we talked a little about city. Fritz talked about sort of the nature reserves, but what's the sort of balance of that, right? So stuff upstream's coming into the city, and then downstream we're putting stuff from the city back into the Conestoga, sometimes clean, sometimes less. You know, can you talk about what this looks like from a little bit broader sort of county, maybe regional? I know there's a lot of money coming in from the county for ARPA, the $3.5 million, you know, the PA Clean Streams Fund for $220 million. You know, obviously there's an attempt to think about this from a regional perspective because it doesn't work if each person is in their own fiefdom. Can you help us understand what's going on there?
Sure. So I think that Lancaster has this amazing ability to think and function like a community. And so that can be very reflective of a watershed. Like you said, it's not one stream at a time. It's all of the land that drains into that stream. And so that's our neighbors, that's our community. And so you can't think of it just as the city or just as an outside municipality or just as a single forest somewhere. I think when we are able to share ideas, to share challenges and barriers, and then success stories as well, that motivates people. That makes you want to be part of a winning team when you see somebody else put in this great project and it's going so well and it has good maintenance and everybody is benefiting from it. That comes from public health benefits, that comes from the actual reductions in things like nutrients and sediments. So if you have a permit that you have to meet, Kate mentioned specific ones for stormwater and for sewer, but there are all kinds of different ways that we have to look at the needs for us as a single watershed. And that's where we have to think about our community and our upstream and downstream neighbors. So it can't just be one at a time. How do we think and reach out to somebody that maybe would be interested in a project, but we've never talked to them? And so one of the ways that the Clean Water Partners is trying to facilitate that is by lifting the capacity of everybody working. And Fritz, you mentioned that so many of us have been part of Water Week. And I think that's a prime example of how we bring together different members of the community for one event. But it really, I mean, it literally trickles everywhere. It makes an impact and people start hearing about it. They start asking questions. They want to be part of that winning team. And so I see that happening more and more, Kevin, in different areas of Lancaster County. And it's exciting. It does bring in those new dollars. It makes the funders want to be part of the winning team. We know that Lancaster County is going to meet the goals that we have, whether that's in the city or in the forests. And so we need more resources to do that. We need people excited and talking to their neighbors, but we need dollars and resources to do that. And so, yeah, we're seeing those start to come in higher levels. And if we're going to meet these goals, we have to operate at a faster pace and a bigger scale. But that comes back to thinking and acting like a community. So I think that Lancaster is the prime place to see those successes. And when funders are in support, when legislators are making different decisions, the voice of Lancaster is getting out as well.
So, and we'll come back to some specifics in a little bit, but you know, let's keep pulling this sort of veil back, right, Jenna? So, okay, now we've talked a little bit about city. Now we've talked a little bit about county. I mean, your alliance is for the Chesapeake Bay, right? It's not really even in Pennsylvania. I mean, so now we're talking region. So help us understand how does that puzzle piece fit into this?
Absolutely. So hopefully most folks know what a watershed is. And we've touched on a lot of this, but really all of the water in Lancaster County is flowing to the Susquehanna River, which provides 50% of the fresh water into the Chesapeake Bay. So clearly what we're doing up here in Pennsylvania, and especially in Lancaster, is going to have a pretty traumatic and dramatic impact on the bay. And really in the simplest terms, we're basically sending too much pollution, nitrogen and phosphorus, which is basically, food for algae, which causes algal blooms in the bay. And then when we have algal blooms in the bay, the bacteria that breaks down the algae uses up all of the oxygen and causes dead zones in the bay. And that's what leads to, I think, some of you have probably seen pictures of like crabs escaping out of the water for oxygen because there's no water left in the bay. So, we are causing some pretty serious issues. But I'm born and raised in Lancaster. So, and really, as all of us have touched on, we've got just as serious issues in Lancaster County on our rivers and streams. So over half of our rivers and streams as well are impaired, and impaired means that 70% of the life that should exist in those streams can no longer survive in those streams. So that's a pretty serious issue. Certainly, Kevin, the stream that you grew up playing in has got to be on the impaired list. And when it's not safe for other life, it's certainly not safe for us either. So we've got a lot of work to do as a community, and really a lot to gain as a community to increase the wildlife and our ability to interact with not only the bay but also our local waterways.
So I think just as like a mental image, or sort of, I just imagined like when you mentioned the crabs coming out of the water trying to breathe the air, I just imagined that the air is so polluted that I tried to breathe water for air, like flipping that on its head. Like obviously, like that's a serious crisis. Like if the air is so difficult that I would look at the water and be like, maybe I can breathe that, right? Like that's just insanely traumatic and obviously negatively impactful on an environmental level. All right, Samantha, gotta go global, form for the future. That sounds futuristic, and I know that you've got offices around the world. So, what are we thinking in a global context here? How does this all come together for us as humanity? Is that a big question for you?
Yeah. Well, so I guess, I often think about how do I kind of talk to folks about the work that we do and the fact that we work in systems. The idea is that we believe there are enough kind of programs out there, but we need systemic change. And I was just thinking through some of what the folks on the call have shared here today and how that kind of gets at that. So maybe I'll just start at that. And then I can kind of weave in a little bit, Kevin, what you were just asking there. But I think one of the things that we're talking about and is so intuitive when we're looking at nature is that it is all connected and it is all a system, right? So our waterways are a system, the forest is a system. And I think that being in nature is one of the ways that we begin to understand that is intuitively true, right? And then it's interesting that many of us then go into our organizations, business in particular, and the way that we are taught to solve problems is very reductionist, right? We're told to break things down and then you solve the pieces parts, and somehow those solving of the pieces parts is supposed to kind of ladder up to this wide scale change that we need. And it's such a disconnect from what I think we intuitively know is that everything's connected. And so you have to be very careful that when you're enacting a solution in one area, it doesn't cause unintended consequences in others. And one of the things that we do at Forum, we do a lot of work with organizations in trying to get them to understand exactly that. So, how do you, if you're solving a sustainability challenge, how are you kind of looking at a systemic diagnosis, if you will, so that when you're enacting programs, you're thinking through, man, how does this connect as a system? And, one of the examples that I think has been made very live to me this week is, I don't know if anyone saw the article in the LA Times about the fact that Los Angeles for the last 20 years has been on a path to make it the city in the United States with the largest rooftop solar community. The challenge, that all sounds great, right? But the challenge is that those solar panels have about a 25 to 30-year lifespan, and we're getting to about the 22 years. So now no one has thought about what do we do with all those solar panels when they reach the end of their life. And so we have a waste crisis now coming in LA because a lot of solar panels actually have components that cannot just go into landfill, right? And so it's this incredible example of how when we don't think systemically about our environmental and social problems, we solve for one challenge, like solar panels, great, and we've created another unintended consequence. Anyway, so I just and then I guess I'll just share one other thing that this, as you're saying, Kevin, how we're starting kind of at this micro level and kind of going out. A lot of people then say to me, well, if you work in systems, you know, what does that have to do with local? Like, isn't that just all big? And I think one of the tenets of thinking in systems and thinking in regeneratively is the idea of fractals. So, and I am not an environmentalist, I am not a scientist here, but you know, the idea, if you look at a pine cone or a fern or a snowflake even, they're fractals, right? And the idea that the big is built from the small. And so when we are trying to do change making, it doesn't always have to be global, right? Like that the small replicates itself. So I just love hearing about some of what we're doing in Lancaster County, because I think it shows that can have deep impact here. But if you believe in the power of fractals, which I do, I think that can ladder out to have global impact. So anyway, those are just, I guess, Kevin, I don't think that answered your question exactly, but I guess I'll just say, like at Forum, what we're trying to do, and I would love at some point from the folks on the call, is we work with a lot of major international corporations. And one of the main things we're trying to do with them is not just set a sustainability strategy where you can check a box that you've reduced your carbon footprint. I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to get us where we need to by 2030, 2040, 2050. But how do we fundamentally change businesses' relationship to nature? Like, how do we get business to understand you are part of nature? You wouldn't be here if nature didn't exist. Nature can exist without you just fine. You can't exist without nature. And so even Fritz, some of these education components that you talked about, I think we know that when we all get that change-making bug, if you will, it all comes often from a deeply personal experiential place. And so how are we, people out there who have the potential to fundamentally change our systems, how are we getting them the experiences, you know, like through your community volunteer program, Fritz, or what have you, to kind of fundamentally change the way we think about nature. And we haven't done that yet. It's hard work. A lot of businesses aren't, you know, that they're locked into some other systems that make that hard. But anyway, that's kind of the work that we do globally. Yeah, so then, I'll let someone else talk now.
So then from globally would be space. So we can just take your solar panels and blast them into space on Elon Musk's rockets, right? Then that won't have any negative impact, right? The humanity's sort of impulse to push it to the next other people's problems, right? And we don't just mention, I don't know if any of you know this game, but as we've talked about systems particularly, there's this wonderful board game called Photosynthesis. And it's like 3D, it's like a board game, and then you have like different trees, and trees are different heights. And when you roll the die, the source of light moves around and you gain points based on if your trees are getting over or underexposed from light, because certain trees need to be in the shade, certain trees need the direct sunlight. Fritz, I don't know if you're familiar with that game, but I bought it for one of my nephews as sort of, he loves science and sort of thinking about what you all are doing. I am curious, how are you helping engage these kids and adults, frankly, because you had me at chainsaw class. I was
well, I just wanted to comment on one thing. You know, well, Samantha, you made some great points about systems and change making, and I think we've taken a very systematic approach to how we're protecting land more recently than ever before, in this idea that you take, because a lot of times we would acquire land and it would be 50 acres and then it becomes 75 and it becomes 100, and that's a strategy to get to an interior forest, which creates more diverse biodiversity, which is what we need as a community. That's where we get more carbon sequestration. That's where we get that, you know, that sweet spot of more animals and insects that can all live in harmony without being disturbed by us. that can really sustain our system long term, that really build out the system ecologically. I'm also deeply intrigued by the corporate challenge, and but you're right, it comes down to those connections. I'm more encouraged than I've ever been by the amount of corporations, or really obviously the individuals within those corporations, that have reached out to us for corporate work days, who are interested in our work. And I think it's the same with the Clean Streams and Rivers work that the Alliance and Clean Water Partners are doing. More encouraged than ever with the effort of some of the corporations, but the individuals within the corporations that are really deeply engaged and committed environmentalists. And it's a long way to go, especially if you're a corporation based in the United States. But if you're based in Europe or you're based somewhere else, you more than likely have a really aggressive carbon program in place. You more than likely have a really aggressive sustainability, full kind of 360 vision in place. Whether they can achieve it within the goals and timelines they've set, and whether that truly helps us with this global climate crisis, is another question that is way beyond, you know, my current capacity. But I am encouraged by what I'm seeing locally, which is where I'm hyper focused on. It's just, what can we do in Lancaster? Because it feels like it's a lack of control with other things. But thank you for those comments.
Fritz, can I kick it to Jenna? Because I think she has some, like you mentioned, the corporate connections here, and the work the Alliance has done is one of those pure examples of local leadership connecting with the needs of their customers, but also their supply chain side.
Is that all right, Kevin? Yeah, okay, great. Well, thank you, Allison. Yeah, so the Alliance, I mentioned earlier that we moved our office to Lancaster, and really our biggest priority there was to serve Amish farmers, knowing that 70% of the pollution that Pennsylvania sends into the Chesapeake Bay is due to agriculture. And that's not because, you know, we truly do deeply believe that farmers don't intend to pollute, you know, don't plan to pollute. We've just got some practices and some, you know, behaviors and traditions that we now understand, you know, their greater implications that we're all trying to, you know, form a community to improve. And as we started to focus on building flexible programs for Amish farmers, that worked for them, you know, helped them be comfortable. For those of you that might not know, our Plains-Side farmers are a little bit more timid when it comes to interacting with government, especially taking government funds because of some of the tax situations that they as a community have. And so we ended up, you know, having some success and, you know, figuring out things like paying the contractor directly for the work that we're doing on a farm, rather than many programs function as a reimbursement for Amish farmers. And as we started to build these relationships, we started to realize that what would work better than anything else for these Amish farmers is if we engage the companies that they're selling their products to. And so we just got incredibly lucky, and just about 6 years ago now met the CEO of Turkey Hill, former CEO of Turkey Hill, John Cox, and just really hit it off with him on this concept of a company you know, starting to play a role and entering into that system, as, you know, that taking that systems approach, as Samantha and Fritz mentioned, to thinking about their role in conservation. And so what Turkey Hill Dairy ended up doing was requiring a conservation plan and the implementation of that conservation plan in their bid out to the supplier of their milk, which was, to our knowledge, the first time that that's ever been done. And that's incredible. A company founded and headquartered still in Lancaster County took this leap to support their dairy farmers. So now we have replicated that partnership that we have with Turkey Hill, I mean, 5 times over. We're now working with Land O'Lakes and Hershey. We are about to start work with Purdue. We have a wonderful partnership with Organic Valley, many partners. And what's beautiful about this approach is that for so long, we've just pointed our fingers at the farmers. We know that 70% of the pollution is coming from ag, so we immediately just blame the farmers. And we don't think about, again, that system, that supply chain, that the farmer's just the first step in. We've got the folks that are taking the product to whoever's going to be, you know, making it into whatever's going to arrive on the grocery store. We don't think about the grocery stores and the consumer too. We're all a piece of it. And so we all have a responsibility, every piece of that pie, to be aware and to be thoughtful about what we can be doing. And so it's just been this beautiful opportunity to educate everyone along the way. And to circle back to where I started, our Amish farmers just love it. I mean, we have a pipeline of just hundreds of farmers who are willing and comfortable because it makes sense to them to do this from an economic perspective. They're grateful because these companies as well are bringing additional dollars to the table. So it's really this community approach to build strategy, to fund the work. And it's, I mean, just to go back to what Fritz said, it is absolutely what makes me optimistic. Being an environmentalist is pretty hard sometimes to maintain optimism, but the rate and intensity of which companies are coming to the table is just absolutely incredible. Thanks, Allison.
It's interesting to hear you talking about the way in which we blame the farmers. It immediately jumps in my mind to sort of the war on drugs, right? The sort of refusal of Americans to be like, hey, our thirst for drugs is as much a problem as them coming from a place like Mexico, right? Like this sort of inability for us to recognize our own part in that system from a consumer level that sort of offloads our own individual accountability and action onto, other parts of that system. But we're never like, oh, right, because of my gluttony, because of my X, Y, or Z, because of my whatever, that this is why this thing exists. So flipping that, and this is to anyone, I mean, so what can I am, at least theoretically, I would like to say I'm an environmentalist for my philosophical concerns, but I'm not from an action standpoint, right? Like I drive a Prius. I filled it up from zero yesterday. It costs $45. I don't know how people get their gas tanks to have $100 to take their pictures and put on social media. But like, other than that, and maybe trying to take a shower for like 30 seconds less than I used to, what are those types of decisions that I, as John Q. Public, who wants to be better about the environment, but is not mired in the work in the way you all are, what are like small but significant steps if we all started to make these changes in our personal lives?
It's such a good question, Kevin. I think there is something just about I think all of us doing the work to recognize where we are in the system and simultaneously like what's our power within that system to kind of change. And then how do we also recognize we are products of the system, right? Like I can only do so much change. I'm one person, right? So I don't know, there's something with like you as an individual, but then you and your role as United Way, I think is an interesting, or for all of us, whatever kind of that individual role we hold, and then maybe the professional role we have where we actually have a platform, like how do we use the bully pulpit to get people to kind of hear us, I think is really important. I guess though, and this is maybe a more concrete example is, people often say to me, well, man, do I buy plastic, I'm buying grocery bag, or, I'm buying garbage bags next week. Do I get the plastic? Do I get the compostable? And I think all those are the right questions, but I think there's something a little simpler about all of us interrogating our own consumption in general. Like how are we taking more than we need, right? Because any sort of consumption, whether it's a resource like water, whether it's going to the store and buying 15 things you don't need, whether it's taking more space from other people's voice when they should have, there's something about when we consume more than we need, there is a carbon footprint implication. There is there's often a waste implication. And then there's the metaphoric implication of us just taking when we don't need. So that's maybe a little philosophical, but I tell my family all the time, like, if we all just reduce the amount of things, resources that we consumed in this life, there would be a big difference. I mean, two of the most practical ones are energy, where you get your energy from and how much you're paying for energy. Travel tends to be, whether it's by plane or by car, but there's just something of, if you need a new desk, can you get it used? Do you need I don't know. There's something about all of us doing the work as consumers, because as consumers, it's one of the biggest places we vote every day, is when are we consuming? What are we consuming? And do we actually need to consume those things? And that can be some of the hardest behavior change work, because it impacts you, but that's maybe, I think, the change making work we all need to do as individuals.
Samantha, I think that each of the people on this panel would be like jumping ready to say what their answer is, because they each have this perfect answer, and us as professionals, our job is to make that easy for John Q. Public. Like Kevin said, it's got to be so simple and so obvious and not be this ultimate decision-making process every time. So, I mean, Fritz, your pictures of the trees that everybody could just take and go, and they know they can plant a tree. And Kate, I love when you guys describe about don't do your laundry when it's pouring outside and what that means if you live in the city. And Jenna, it's go buy Turkey Hill ice cream. There's easy steps that are simple. So I would love to hear from each of you, because the pause was only because everybody wanted to go first.
I'll jump in, and I already mentioned community wildlife habitat. So for us, of course, part of it is and now Allison referenced this with the free trees and native shrubs, but part of it is what you have control of and what you can do on your own property. So if you're a property owner, simple things like reducing your lawn size, making sure you're not mowing it as much with that single cycle lawnmower that spews carbon dioxide, that you're thinking about the runoff from your property and how you create a more sustainable habitat, which can be quite beautiful, is one major step that we've really tried to emphasize because it's core to the Conservancy's mission. The other thing that I've been really kind of inspired by, and I think we're all familiar with, but for the folks who've tuned in, is Regenerate Lancaster, or Regen All. So regeneratelancaster.org or regenall.org, and the work that they're doing. And one of the things, there's a lot of information out there about carbon offsets, but they're reinvesting whatever investments that you and I would make in offsetting our carbon back into our local community. And that, I think, is a very, very important step, so you can feel good about that flight. You can feel better about that flight that you're taking or the carbon that you're putting out in the environment, because you can do a calculation to see how much it is. Then you can invest in offsets and know that a local organization is investing in local regional projects that you get to follow. And to me, that's a pretty brilliant model that gives me really a lot of hope moving forward. It segues perfectly into the clean air conversation, obviously segues a lot into clean water, because even all the work that we're doing around clean water is regenerative in nature. And so just wanted to bring them to light here as part of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Fritz. I wanted to mention, I was trying to figure out when to mention that, and I'll just say it ties into what Jenna was talking about with the farmers. When I've talked to Eric Sauter, who's of course the founder of that, and he talks about his conversations with conservative farmers that he wasn't sure if they would buy in. He said they're ecstatic about this. They want to be part of it. They, more than almost anybody else, knows the value of healthy soil, right? So, we sometimes get sort of assumptive about politics, one side and the other side, and X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, on the ground, people recognize that a healthy environment is always good for you. You may make individual choices that aren't helpful, but when you actually sit down and think about it, no one's like, I really wish that my soil is poisonous. Like, that's what I really want, right? So that kind of work that brings all parties in and is solution focused, I think it's so powerful. So yeah, just for those of you who don't know, Regional is something you can certainly look into as a practical personal action. Kate, Allison mentioned the sort of don't do your laundry when it's raining.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and that is certainly one of those simple things that that we don't think about. Yeah, don't do your laundry, don't run your dishwasher, even maybe don't take a shower while it's raining, because that's when we've got the most pressure on our system. But yeah, just wanted to plug in, because there's lots of great programs, both for city residents and for out in the county. So yeah, Fritz spoke about the fantastic community wildlife habitat program, where there are volunteers who will come out and do an audit of your property and give you ideas of what you could do for to plant more native plants, do better landscaping practices. And once you get that audit, I would then recommend hire a certified landscaper in sustainable landscaping practices. So I sit on the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council board, and our mission is to create this community of practitioners who are trained in the best and most sustainable landscaping practices to protect our waterways, to manage stormwater, to create habitat, all that great stuff. And the city has been hosting the program since 2017, I believe. So we have many local landscapers and contractors and designers who are trained and ready to do this work. And so recommend looking for them. If you go to cblpro.org, you can find that directory of contractors. And with that, if you're in the city and you're interested in installing a stormwater management practice on your property, the city has a residential stormwater grant program. So if you are interested in putting in a rain garden or a dry well, which is like a stone bed underground to absorb the water, maybe from a roof area, you can get grant funding to help with that. And I'd be happy to send me an email, give me a call. I'd be happy to connect you with that. Another great thing to do is to plant a street tree or a backyard tree, but we could especially use more of those empty tree wells that are empty. Trees are a fundamental part of our stormwater management system in the city. A healthy, mature tree is going to be just doing a tremendous job at capturing stormwater and absorbing it, even more so than any of our, kind of engineered systems that we're installing. So taking care of your existing trees is also really important. You can adopt a practice that, so say there's a rain garden on your block and you want to help take care of it, we're starting a rain garden adoption program. So I'd be happy to connect you with that. We'll give you the training and you can do any level of what you're interested in. And, if you say, I'm not a plant person, I don't know if I can help with that. If you want to go out and just pick trash out of the rain garden, that would be amazing and totally appreciated. So yeah, and then the last thing, cleaning off your storm drain before a storm. So we're supposed to get some rain today. If you've got leaves and whatever blocking up your storm drain, it's a small thing and it can make a tremendous difference in localized flooding in the city. So, when we've got our intersections full of water, a lot of times the problem is that those storm drains are just covered. And once that debris is moved off, then they can drain freely. And as you can imagine, there are thousands of storm drains in the city, and our city staff just doesn't have the capacity to get out to all of them. So it's a great way to help your immediate situation if you're seeing standing water on the street in front of your house. It's just clean that storm drain off.
Well, it's a little bit long-term too, right? Because if you don't clean it, then over time, the stuff starts to get down. You start ending up with the clogs which are harder to solve than just go out there and grab your rake or your hands or whatever. The other is walking. We have a neighbor who, her and her son, they walk every day and they take a trash bag with them on Fridays and they just pick the trash.
Yeah.
So we talked really super sort of going really micro. One of our questions from Tim Stolger is, if the panelists could talk about planning, zoning, land use, how can we make good land use decisions when there are 60 municipalities in Lancaster County and there's so much development pressure? Land prices are hitting farmers hard, probably you at the Conservancy too, Fritz. How do we preserve land without sort of sending prices further upward and the consequences of that challenge? And that is, none of you are specifically sort of municipal managers, but I mean, Kate, you're the largest municipality, but you're one of 60. And
Right.
I mean, what is the interconversation? Is there an interconversation going on at all?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a challenge that, that each municipality is, often inwardly focused and looking at our own land use practices. And so how can we coordinate more broadly? Obviously, our county planning department is looking at those, those larger scale issues and how to coordinate amongst municipalities. And there is a good bit of intermunicipal discussion and work that is going on. But I think it's a really critical thing. And I might toss it to another panelist. I know there is a lot of work in
Allison,
in land protection and farmland protection that other groups are doing. So yeah, I'll kick it up to others to comment.
Yeah, Allison, please.
Yeah, Kate, that's a great example of how you have to think as your area, like for the responsibilities that each municipality has. But I think we talked about watersheds and thinking like a system, and that's true for a municipal official too, for zoning, for decisions that might impact or be most for a municipal mindset, be very important for the people that live there. But that's a political, unnatural line or boundary there. Water doesn't observe that. The land use and air may not observe that line. And so just one tool that we have is the countywide action plan. This is available online too, but this is a plan that is to help bring everybody around that one common goal of clean and clear by 2040, but it includes how are we going to do that from a zoning and land use perspective, acknowledging those challenges, but then getting into the specifics. What are the practices that we need within agriculture, within the stormwater world to get enough buffers planted? We know that there has to be some zoning and ordinance changes, but they're going to be really different if you're in the southern end or if you're in the city or if you're in somewhere else. And so understanding what the local cultural needs are, what the land use traditions are, what the actual soil types are, because one practice isn't going to work in every single place. Or maybe those erosion rates or the flooding issues are causing a real need locally that it requires a specific kind of permit or legislative change or policy change within a municipality. So I think having an open dialogue and making sure that people feel comfortable and safe and empowered to talk to different people, to their neighbors, but someone that they may not always be reaching out to for every decision, but especially at the municipal level. Kevin, I take it back to your other question about what can we do as John Q. Public? Like, I need to go to my own municipal meetings more often and speak up for clean water, and making sure that that is on the radar for the people who represent us and make the decisions about our own local community. So I would say that's something we all can do more often, is making sure that clean water and preserving what we have from a places 2040 perspective, all the way down to what's our individual local needs too.
Can you talk a little bit about the money, the ARPA money, the PA money? Like, I mean, because I would presume ARPA money at the county level, that crosses all the municipalities. So, you know, oftentimes work follows the money, unfortunately, right? So how is that being? Is there a plan for those dollars and thinking about how they're going to sort of cross the artificial boundaries?
So for the dollars that were just recently awarded from the county to clean water projects, there are 11 projects that are included in that single award. There were 50 projects that we submitted that we know could use the dollars. Probably more than that. Yeah, it was more than that. And so the 11 that we could get funding for at this point, they're ready to go. We have a plan in place. We know a project lead for each one. And yeah, they're across all different kinds of boundaries. They are projects that are collaborative in nature. One is literally the creek that is the boundary between two municipalities, two counties. The conservancy's involved. There's farmland next door. It's a perfect example of how the local needs there have been a priority for the Watershed Association, for the permits that each municipality needs. And so the money is, in this case, able to support projects that are local priorities and are going to be able to move the ball forward at that pace and scale that we need to meet some of our countywide action plan goals. We know there's more than that. There's more need than that. And so the fight will continue to keep supporting all those different organizations and keep scaling up.
Excellent, thank you. I was at a conversation last night about education, and one of the comments was made was just a reminder that our school district boundaries are in some cases have multiple school districts with one representative. So, you know, the artificial lines create sort of natural groups that for some reason we sometimes see as competitive in nature, right? Like fighting instead of saying, why don't we come together and advocate together? So to hear that those projects, which inherently then, if they're crossing these lines, have to come together with a plan, I just, you know, hope that we can think more about that. And again, to the point of, you know, what you can do as an individual and interacting with your legislators and that kind of thing, is demanding that they also represent like a wider sense. Like, okay, I get that my neighbor across the street doesn't vote for you because he's in another legislative district, but I'm expecting that his or her self-interest is also being represented by you as government, even if they're not in your jurisdiction, right? Telling people that I'm not going to vote for you if you only take care of really small fiefdoms. Like, I expect you to think broader. I think is a challenge that we can push to our representatives, because ultimately they are our representatives. And for whatever reason, we think that politics means, oh, focus only on the people who vote for you. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think we can sort of push that as we do that work. So we're sort of coming here to a close. I got one question here, and then I'll move us into the closing question. But this again is sort of a global thinking one. The question is, this individual, we've heard that 100 companies are responsible for about 71% of global emissions. How can a singular person affect change when pollution is happening at such a large scale? Right. So we can feel super small, and yet, what is the sort of response to that if we feel so small?
I think to go back to Samantha talking about sort of the power that you have as a consumer and what you choose to do, whether it's buying something that's used or even your choices that you make in a grocery store. I think it's sort of the same as, your vote in an election. Sometimes you feel small, but collectively, it adds up to be something much larger. The companies that we're working with, by and large, are taking steps and making investments into sustainability because their investors have understood that this is now a cost of doing business. This is what it means to remain competitive in today's world. And that's all because of what they're hearing from their consumers. And oftentimes I've heard about, how consumers have the option to sort of send little questions here and there to companies. They reference those in their decision-making when we're building a partnership with them. So I think I totally understand the question. And I think that we collectively have power to make certain choices with what we consume. I really, like I said, Samantha, I want to get together and have coffee with you because I think there's a lot of things that
we've been trying.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, so I think just being thoughtful and knowing that we will build the momentum collectively.
I just really quickly Googled, which is always bad, right? Like, don't Google the things that you want to find out impulsively. And just on waste, there are 300,000 items in the average American home. The average size of American home has nearly tripled in size over the past 50 years. 1 out of every 10 Americans rents offsite storage. 25% of people with 2-car garages don't have room to park a car inside of them. 32% don't have room to park 1 car inside of a 2-car garage. 3.1% of the world's children live in America, own 40% of the toys consumed globally. Like, this accumulation of stuff, hoarding, all of these kinds of sort of both like, obviously clinical hoarding is a separate issue. That's a mental health issue, but I'm just talking about sort of anecdotal hoarding where we just buy things. The one that I think alarmed me actually the most is, as I sort of looked at this list, is that the average person today buys 60% more items of clothing than they did only 15 years ago. And they discard them in half as much time. These are things that we're just unnecessary, that we're sort of engaging in. I think there's a lot of behaviors around accumulation. And I'm as guilty as the next person. Actually, I'm probably guiltier because I love my electronic toys. I just never throw them away. So I tell myself that the box full of electronic toys that I'll never use again, at least I didn't create waste. It's obviously just a pawn off to my children when they have to go through my stuff. But I think that I think we do have a lot more power to make these decisions than we think. But also to the sort of list that I just read, my desk is always messy. My desk is bigger than the desk I used to have, which was also just as messy, right? Because we fill the space that we have. So if you buy a bigger house, you're going to put more stuff in it, right? If you buy a bigger car, you're going to keep more junk in it. Like, these are just the way you're going to buy bigger stuff because you can haul the whole Costco thing instead of having to rent a U-Haul to get it out, right? So, I think that this issue of individual action is really important, both from a sort of unique buying a specific item, but also how I'm setting myself up and my life up. People making decisions around businesses, right? I mean, it's that offset again, right? Like, so I've got a right now here at United Way, because we have a flex schedule, most of our staff works from home. Well, now I'm heating and cooling this empty building while simultaneously increasing the energy consumption because we have more video calls for people at home. How am I balancing that? What am I deciding the next time our lease is up? Those decisions on that corporate level. Someone mentioned the thing, I think Samantha, about like what your platform is and what your opportunities are.
Yeah.
So the last question I have, I want to be, I've heard a lot about bugs and other things, but like, can I eradicate mosquitoes? Like there's no environmental detriment to getting rid of mosquitoes, right? They have
Is
no,
this what we're going to end on, Kevin?
no, we're not. That's the question I want an answer to, but I'm not going to leave that one for you all. No, the question I really do want to leave you with. So I actually don't like when people say, well, what gives you hope? I do not like that end question because I don't think it propels us to action. And so I'm actually going to end this not with the intention of being on a downer, but what gives you a little bit of fear, hesitancy? We've heard that there is some more optimism. Like, where do you think like we really need to be thinking about from your lane? Like this, is the most critical thing that like if we keep just focusing on the good parts, we're not going to tackle these things because they're too hard or whatever. Where's the work got to be in your lane that we really need to be focused on, or we're going to have some serious problems?
I think, Kevin, I was going to respond to what you were saying on consumption, and maybe this kind of fits into this. I think that as much as we can make change as individuals, I think that's right. I also recognize that there are businesses out there that I have empathy with, that they've built a 50-year business, 100-year business built on selling more items, right? And in doing that, they're providing jobs. They're like, these are not easy things to kind of get out of, right? And so there's something where one of the things that gives me pause and is I hear exciting things about kind of businesses, and I know there's other organizations, but that's where a lot of my work sits, that are considering new business models and thinking about ways that they can still be thriving, vibrant contributors to communities and not contribute to some of these planetary and social crises. I think what gives me pause is, given how the monolith of business and how difficult it is to move business, I worry sometimes, will we be able to do this at the pace and time horizon that we need? So local businesses give me hope. Some big businesses, that make big leaps give me hope, but that businesses being locked into the same systems that I think they might want to change, but they're locked in. Are they innovating fast enough with business models, et cetera, to get us where we need to? So.
It's a really great point, Samantha, and that, it connects to, in many ways, to, I guess, what I would echo as my greatest concern, which would be kind of the ecological collapse that we're witnessing with insects and birds, which is directly connected to, the pollinator system that feeds our whole food system. And it's largely out of sight, right? Because we've removed ourselves. We have put ourselves in these, going back to what Kevin was saying, these larger homes in these suburbs with these big lawns. We've removed ourselves from the natural environment, so we don't really lay witness to what's happening in the natural world around us. We're sitting in our air conditioning for the most part, and a lot of that has been driven by the products that we're consuming and the corporations that are generating income and employing our neighbors. So it's kind of a nasty web. But I do go back to our greatest concern as an organization, and my greatest concern as an individual, is what we're seeing with those collapses. If it is as they predict, that could create incredible food shortages, and at the same time, I'm buoyed by what I see as it relates to the alarm around this beautiful monarch butterfly, which, whenever you see one flutter by, you're like, oh my God, there it is. It's like what the bald eagle was 20 years ago. And the bald eagle returned because we identified what the issue was, which was chemical related. And it's the same thing with the insects and the birds. It's largely chemical related. It's what we're doing on our own personal properties. It's what we're allowing others to do around us. And it's been identified, and there's action that's taking place, but is it happening quick enough, and will it happen soon enough?
Chris, I would go off of that to say that my fear, or the thing that causes me nervousness, is that all of that happens we all assume things happen or they happen behind the scenes and we don't have to see it. So my concern is that the apathy is just going to be okay, and that we don't step up and we don't take action enough because we just think it's going to keep happening behind the scenes and we don't have to worry about it. And that just, we can't let that get a hold of us, whether that's basic drinking water treatment or preserving the forests and insects for what they provide in that systemic approach. So I think there is so much momentum though, that I'm not really nervous, but that's the thing that causes me concern.
I completely agree with what everyone shared. And when you asked that question, what came to me, Kevin, for whatever reason, and I think relates, is consumption of screen time. And I think that builds into our apathy. And I think that it results, I mean, I still, for someone who has a garden, who loves being outdoors, et cetera, cannot believe when I get my weekly screen report, how much time I'm spending just on this phone. And so I think it can bleed into our apathy. It also just results in us spending less time outdoors and understanding the real world consequences of what's going on and being less able to, make change ourselves, but also understand and find spaces for collaboration. So I think that we have a lot of work to do. And I think, through the pandemic, a lot of us did get outdoors. It's amazing to hear. And I'm fortunate, to hear that some of our preserves are being almost overused. But I think that, talking about consumption, we also just consume a lot of screen and a lot of digital crap too, that I don't think is the best for us as a society.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's been said about the apathy. And I think the larger concern that I have, kind of stemming from all of that is that our elected leaders are just as subject to that apathy, and with that apathy, if they are not being pushed into the greater policy changes that we really need to see. And we have unfortunately, so much environmental policy kind of moves at the political whims, and we've seen that in recent history, and massive staffing reductions at DEP and at EPA, and limits to the abilities of these agencies to carry out their work. We as citizens need to keep the pressure on our elected leaders to make these issues a priority. And with so many other pressing issues facing all of us all the time, I think sometimes environmental issues get pushed down the list, but it really is, at the end of the day, the thing that is fundamentally affecting all of us the most deeply. So I just think it's really important that we keep that pressure on, and recognize that our elected officials are human as we are. And so, that apathy and that distraction with screen time and everything else can affect them as well. So we need to keep their eye on the prize and moving us in the direction that we need to be.
Yeah, so I like to make sure that we continue to put our problems in front of us. Too often we only put our solutions, and that drives apathy as well. So I appreciate you all helping us to think about that. I'm gonna close with I don't know if anybody, well, none of us are old enough to remember this, but in 1959, there was a debate between Nikita Khrushchev of Russia and Richard Nixon. It's called the kitchen debates, is what it's colloquially called. And at one point, they're going through these model homes that were built by the Russian model and then the American model. And there's an exchange. They were both very testy of one another. And they're talking about the cost of homes and the ability for their employees, their workers, their citizens to move into them. And Khrushchev says, "We have steel workers and peasants who can afford to spend $14,000 for a house. Your American houses are built to last only 20 years, so builders could sell more new houses. We build firmly. We build for our children and grandchildren." Nixon says, "American houses last for more than 20 years, but even so, after 20 years, many Americans want a new house or a new kitchen. Their kitchen is obsolete by that time. The American system is designed to take advantage of new inventions and new techniques." Now, obviously, from a geopolitical standpoint, communism did not survive and exceed the American democratic system. But I think there's something to be said of merging those two ideologies and saying, we can build things with new technologies, but that the new technologies are built to be more long lasting than planned obsolescence, like a new iPhone every year. And I think as a society, as we can begin to demand that, right? There's no reason why you should be allowed to build me a phone that dies after 2 years when you could build me a phone that could last longer. And so we as consumers have a lot of power to demand of our businesses, of our governmental officials and others, that we do expect that American innovation and new technologies are thought of for our children and our grandchildren, not just for ourselves. And so I thank each and every one of you for your time. We are at time. And Fritz specifically for the presentation, Olivia Smucker for setting this all up for my team. Thank everyone who attended, those of you who are watching later on, deeply appreciate you. Please, if you are interested in any of this work, find these individuals and their organizations. And of course, most of us, if not all of us, do accept, well, I guess the city takes taxes. The rest of us take some form of contributions and financial contributions. So if you're interested in helping support our work, financial contributions are very important to each of our nonprofit organizations. Please also find time to volunteer with us in various ways that you are able. United Way, of course, always hosts the volunteer portal site, and each of these organizations are invited to put any volunteer opportunities there so you can find them in one single place. Thank you all, and have a wonderful weekend.